Hello, my soul family, and welcome to another episode of the 365-day lessons from A Course in Miracles. My name is Christy Ramirez. I'm your soul coach, spiritual influencer, and motivational speaker. And today we are here to continue these powerful lessons that Jesus really wants to teach us and guide us to live in more love and not let fear stand in our way, not let our ego destroy all that you're building, and not let even the dark get in the way of your dreams, and elevate into this lightness that you're meant to be. And I think that today is a very beautiful moment because this is the second episode so far. Every episode, every week that we're gathering, we are going over about 6 lessons so that we can kind of keep moving and not take too long with these lessons. But I do recommend that you check out the teachings from A Course in Miracles, which are the first 31 teachings that I taught, a full 60 to 90 minute course, each class. It's so amazing, it was so interesting, and they are all exclusive, available at my School of Light. So make sure that you check out that membership at christyramirez.com/school. So now I would really love for all of you to join me on this beautiful late evening for some coffee and A Course in Miracles, and Jesus being in his presence here today, right now, with his healing presence, because he is the ascended master healer, and he is here to remind us that he's here to help us to heal our hearts of any unforgiveness or any fear that might be standing in the way of your ascension or standing in the way of your transformation. Because remember what Jesus stands for, which he is wanting me to remind us all. He was evidence of the resurrection and of his transmutation from flesh to soul, right? Reminding us that it is our soul that is eternal, and it is what lives on after death. And that is why it is a priority, our soul journey. It is why I do what I do, why I'm a soul coach, and I've dedicated my life to this, because there's just so much more than your life here on earth, and even mental health per se. Because all the mental aspects, the emotional aspects, and the physical aspects are actually related to the flesh of the human, whereas the spiritual aspect is related to your soul. And that's just something that is just priceless. It's something that can't be taken away from you. And it's something that will only help you to keep growing and help you to elevate in your soul, which is a much deeper aspect, because your soul lives on, and it can mature at a very different level than your physical self. And so this physical self with the lowercase s is the ego that we're talking about. It is the self that presents itself in the world. It is the self that has a career. It is the self that has a family. It is the self that has friends, that has an image, basically. And it is the capital S self that we are working on in this series and in everything that I do, all the content that I film. It is the higher self within that is wanting to be shown through your ego self, through your human self, so that you may become walking embodiments of Christ, living as your higher self, which is a very difficult task. That is something that cannot be achieved overnight. It is definitely a lifelong journey. And that is okay, because that is why we're here, to support one another in this journey of ups and downs. But I truly believe that it is possible to continue strong on this journey. And it is going to make you feel so much better. And it is going to definitely strengthen you from within so that you can conquer anything that happens externally. So with that being said, for a little introduction, let us get started and let us continue with lesson 7 for today. All right, my soul family, let us continue. It's just a beautiful moment here to appreciate the presence of Jesus with us, appreciate the little things in life, the little luxuries that we get to be rewarded with. I think it's so important to always be grateful for and never take for granted. You know, I've made it a point, not only since, having a hold of this book, but always, there's just always so much to be grateful for. And You know, in Jesus's time, and even Jesus when he was living here on earth, he was a very humble person. And this humbleness is something that we can always carry with us, no matter how much you have, because that's irrelevant. It's just your perspective towards it, and it is your intention with it, and it is always how grateful and how you show your gratitude to God for it. Because luxurious blessings from God doesn't mean it's a bad thing. It doesn't mean that it is an egocentric thing. That just means that it's God's way of blessing us, right? It's divine royalty. And I think that I think it's also a reminder from above that we or anybody should not feel guilty for having things, because I know that in this modern era, in this modern world, it's a lot of the focus, and it is just the intention behind it. And you know, I think that, you know, for example, the luxurious things that I like in life are usually art-based, and they all come from this art sense, and every single piece of art is divine. It's divinely inspired. And so art is a beautiful thing, so why would that be something to feel guilty of, right? And God gives, you know, money to those who need it, who are going to use it for something good, and it can serve very powerful purposes. So that is just a reminder. Let's continue now with our lessons for today. So here we got this beautiful book of A Course in Miracles. I just love this book, and we are going to open up to lesson 7. So I also chose the first 6 lessons to do together in episode 1 because they were very interrelated with the message, and now the next couple ones are also related with now another message. We start with I see only the past. So whatever just happened in the past, whether that is years ago, in your childhood, or literally just 5 minutes ago, it's in the past. So we must not let it disturb our present moment, because this present moment is filled with so much peace. No matter what just happened, or no matter where you're sitting at in this present moment. And that is all that we need to acknowledge, right? Speaking of gratitude, it has a lot to do with that. So let's get reading. This idea is particularly difficult to believe at first, yet it is the rationale for all of the preceding ones. It is the reason why nothing that you see means anything. It is the reason why you have given everything you see all the meaning that it has for you. And it is the reason why you do not understand anything you see. It is the reason why your thoughts do not mean anything, and why they are like the things that you see. It is the reason why you are never upset for the reason you think, right? Everything is just not what it is, not what it seems. And it's not what it is, whatever you think it is. It is the reason why you are upset, because you see something that is not there. Old ideas about time are very difficult to change because you believe it's rooted in time and depends on your not learning these new ideas about it. Yet that is precisely why you need new ideas about time. This first time idea is not really so strange as it may sound at first. Look at a cup, for example. So let's get a little example here to get perspective and concept. Do you see a cup? Take this cup, for example. Or are you merely reviewing your past experiences of picking up a cup, being thirsty, drinking from a cup, feeling the rim of a cup against your lips, having breakfast, and so on? Are not your aesthetic reactions to the cup too based on past experiences, right? You've been told and you've been taught what a cup is supposed to do, how it's supposed to look like, what's its function, right? So how do you kind of blank all that out so that you can get a fresh perspective? And I think that this can be applied to anything in life, right? Whether that, again, like we spoke about last time, whether that be relationships, whether that be something of an opportunity in your life. How else would you know whether or not this kind of cup will break if you drop it? What do you know about this cup except what you learned in the past? You would have no idea what this cup is except for your past learning. Do you then really see it? So look about you. This is equally true of whatever you look at. Acknowledge this by applying the idea for today indiscriminately to whatever catches your eye. For example, I see only the past in this pencil. I see only the past in this shoe. I see only the past in this hand. And I see only the past in that body. I see only the past in that face. So do not linger over any one particular thing, but remember to omit nothing specifically, right? Don't be particular about anything in particular. It just applies to everything, right? Glance briefly at each subject and then move on to the next. Just like we glance over the past and then move on to the next. So I think that that is a very powerful lesson, which brings us to lesson 8. My mind is preoccupied with past thoughts. That's how we are disturbed of our peace in this moment, is when our mind is preoccupied with things of the past that make no sense right now, unless it is a lesson that you've learned in the past and maybe you're not wanting to repeat that lesson. Then you're kind of utilizing that past moment for good, for something productive, but it is never good to linger on for too long, especially if you're lingering on the negative aspects and not on the positive things that you've learned, right? So let's get reading. This idea is, of course, the reason why you see only the past. No one really sees anything. He sees only his thoughts projected outward. The mind's preoccupation with the past is the cause of the total misconception about time from which your seeing suffers. Your mind cannot grasp the present, which is the only time there is. It therefore cannot understand time and cannot, in fact, understand anything. Right? Because if you're preoccupied with the past, there is no space in your mind for what's happening right now. And then there is almost like a disorientation because you're not really present in the moment. So that's important to remember. If you really want to enjoy your moment, forget about what just happened in the past. The only holy true thought one can hold about the past is that it is not here. To think about it at all is therefore to think about illusions, because that's what really the past is. It's an illusion, it's in the air, it's not really something tangible, right? And that's kind of like the interesting and very ethereal part and intangible part as well of like past, present, and future. None of it is tangible. It's not something that you can put in a box and literally revisit. You have to go into your mind and then kind of seek that out. So very few minds have realized what is actually entailed in picturing the past or in anticipating the future. The mind is actually blank when it does this because it is not really thinking about anything. So the purpose of the exercises for today is to begin to train your mind to recognize when it is not really thinking at all. While thoughtless ideas preoccupy your mind, the truth is blocked. Recognizing that your mind has been merely blank, rather than believing that it is filled with real ideas, is the first step to opening the way to vision. So again, getting into that blank space. There is a saying that says, empty your mind to allow for the genius of the divine. That's the only way that we can allow our vision to be open and receptive to what God wants to illuminate us with, right? So the exercises for today should be done with your eyes closed. And that is also a way of activating your spiritual eye. It is by closing your physical eyes so that you can start to see with your spiritual eye. And this is because you actually cannot see anything in the physical. And it is easier to recognize that no matter how vividly you may picture a thought, you are not seeing anything. With as little investment as possible, search your mind for the usual minute or so, merely noting the thoughts that you find there. Name each one by the central figure or theme that it contains and pass on to the next. Introduce the practice period by saying, I seem to be thinking about blank. And it's important to acknowledge and recognize what it is that is ruminating in your mind. And when you pinpoint at what it is that's coming up, then you can easier diminish that thought. And then name each of your thoughts specifically. For example, I seem to be thinking about blank, a name of a person, or it can be a name of an object or a name of an emotion, right? And so on. Concluding at the end of the mind searching period with, but my mind is preoccupied with past thoughts. So this is how you kind of conclude and seal that disturbance, is by affirming that those minds, your mind is preoccupied with past thoughts. And this can be done 4 or 5 times during the day, unless you find that it irritates you. If you find it trying 3 or 4 times are sufficient. You might find it helpful, however, to include your irritation or any emotion which the idea for today may induce in the mind searching itself. So if it is something that's irritating you or triggering you, you might want to take a deeper look at that. So that's a very powerful lesson. Let's just continue to lesson 9. And it starts, I see nothing as it is now. So now we're moving into focusing on the moment, on the now. We see nothing now because we blanked out the past and the future hasn't happened. So the now is free to just be. And that's a beautiful space to be. It's very liberating, right? This idea obviously follows from the 2 preceding ones. So interesting, we just chose those 2 ones, right? And while you may be able to accept it intellectually, it is unlikely that it will mean anything to you as yet. However, understanding is not necessary at this point. In fact, the recognition that you do not understand is a prerequisite for undoing your false ideas. These exercises are concerned with practice, not with understanding. And you do not need to practice what you really understand, right? If you don't understand what we're learning, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't be practicing it, because it is going to help you to get into a space of understanding. So at first, if you're new to this, you're going to have to blindly follow and trust in Jesus' teachings and allow these teachings to transform you. And then naturally you will begin to understand. So it would indeed be circular to aim at understanding and assume that you have it already. It is difficult for the untrained mind to believe that what seems to be pictured before it is not there. This idea can be quite disturbing and may meet with active resistance in any number of forms. Yet that does not preclude applying it no more than it is required for these or any other exercises. Each little step will clear a little of the darkness away, and understanding will finally come to lighten every corner of the mind which has been cleared of the debris that darkens it. Right? So we want to clear away the illusions, the darkness that is fogging, or it is creating a veil of illusion and confusion of this understanding. So these exercises, for which 3 or 4 practice periods are sufficient, involve looking about you and applying the idea for the day to whatever you see, remembering the need for its indiscriminate application and the essential rule of excluding nothing. So for example, I do not see this typewriter as it is now. I do not see this key as it is now. I do not see this telephone as it is now, or anything in particular. And begin with things that are nearest you and then extend the range. I do not see that coat rack as it is now. I do not see that face as it is now. And I do not see that door as it is now. It is emphasized again that while complete inclusion should not be attempted, specific exclusion must be avoided. So be sure that you are honest in making this distinction, as you may be tempted to obscure it. And then lesson 10, my thoughts do not mean anything. So as you are focusing on being very present in this moment, thoughts from the past will resurface. Or it can just be anything that will create anxiety or create fear, anything of the ego. And we need to affirm and continue to affirm that they do not mean anything. So this idea applies to all of the thoughts of which you are aware or become aware in the practice periods. The reason the idea is applicable to all of them is that they are not your real thoughts. We have made this distinction before and will again, as you have no basis for comparison as yet. And when you do, you will have no doubt that what you once believed were your thoughts did not mean anything. And this is the second time that we have used this kind of idea. The form is only slightly different. This time the idea is introduced with my thoughts instead of these thoughts, and no link is made overtly with the things around you. The emphasis is now on the lack of reality of what you think. And this aspect of the correction process began with the idea that the thoughts of which you are aware are meaningless, outside rather than within, and then stressed their past rather than their present status. So now we are emphasizing that the presence of these thoughts means that you are not thinking. And this is merely another way of repeating our earlier statement that your mind is really a blank. Right? Because if these thoughts are surfacing, and it says here that it means that you are not thinking, it's almost like separating ourselves from these thoughts and envisioning and labeling these thoughts as an external entity coming into your mind, disturbing your peace. So this means that naturally you yourself are not thinking. It's these thoughts that are invading your mind. And that's easier to get rid of these thoughts when you kind of see them as not yours and you are able to return to your peace. So that's very powerful. It is a therapeutic strategy as well that a lot of therapists use, and it really does work. So this is merely another way of repeating our earlier statement that your mind is really a blank. Naturally, your mind is blank. So to recognize this is to recognize nothingness when you think that you see it. And as such, it is the prerequisite for vision. And we're speaking of spiritual vision here. So close your eyes for these exercises and introduce them by repeating the idea for today quite slowly to yourself. And then add, this idea will help to release me from all that I now believe. The exercises consist as before in searching your mind for all of the thoughts which are available to you. Without selection or judgment, try to avoid classification of any kind. In fact, if you find it helpful to do so, you might imagine that you are watching an oddly assorted procession going by which has little if any personal meaning to you. And as each one crosses your mind, say, this thought about blank does not mean anything, and that thought about blank does not mean anything. So today's idea can obviously serve for any thought that distresses you at any time. In addition, 5 practice periods are recommended, each involving no more than a minute or so of mind searching. It is not recommended that this time period be extended, and it should be reduced to half a minute or even less if you experience discomfort. Remember, however, to repeat the idea slowly before applying it specifically, and also to add, this idea will help to release me from all that I now believe. So erasing past belief systems to allow for new ones just to be created. Very powerful. All right, and now for the next lesson, lesson 11. My meaningless thoughts are showing me a meaningless world. So now we are not only labeling these thoughts as an external entity, but now we're labeling them as meaningless, like they don't matter, because again, they do come from the ego usually, right? These thoughts that are going to disturb your peace are always of the ego. Unless you have positive thoughts, then that's not what we're talking about, because that's not disturbing your peace, it's not affecting your quality of life. But if your thoughts are of the past that might be hurtful, might create pain, or whatever emotion surfaces, then we need to see them as meaningless because they don't have any more meaning. Why ruminate and go over thoughts that are not serving you anymore? And then they're showing you a meaningless world, because the more that you submit to these meaningless thoughts, then your world is going to be meaningless, and that's the experience that you're going to be creating. So this is the first idea we have had, which is related to a major phase of the correction process. Now we're trying to correct, right, the reversal of the thinking of the world, because a lot of this comes from the conditioning of the world and how we were raised growing up. So it seems as if the world determines what you perceive, right? That's where it all begins. And in order to get to a blank space, we need to acknowledge this. So today's idea introduces the concept that your thoughts determine the world that you see, because obviously your thoughts determine your experience and your reality. So be glad indeed to practice the idea in this initial form. For in this idea is your release made sure. The key to forgiveness lies in it. So the practice periods for today's idea are to be undertaken somewhat differently from the previous ones. Begin with eyes closed and repeat the idea slowly to yourself. And then open your eyes and look about near or far, up or down, anywhere. And during the minute or so to be spent in using the idea, merely repeat it to yourself, being sure to do so without haste and with no sense of urgency or effort. To do these exercises for maximum benefit, the eyes should move from one thing to another fairly rapidly, since they should not linger on anything in particular, right? We don't want to hyperly focus on one particular aspect. We want to see it as just for what it is, a chair for what it is, but it shouldn't hold too much meaning that it will take your focus away from what's important, right? So the words, however, should be used in an unhurried, even leisurely fashion. The introduction to this idea should be practiced as casually as possible. It contains the foundation for the peace, relaxation, and freedom from worry that we are trying to achieve. On concluding the exercises, close your eyes and repeat the idea once more, slowly to yourself. 3 practice periods today will probably be sufficient. However, if there is little or no uneasiness and an inclination to do more, as many as 5 may be undertaken, but more than this is not recommended. So, last lesson for today would be lesson 12, which is again stemming off from the previous lesson. And let's see here. We might even go up to lesson 14 because they all have to do with this meaningless topic. So, lesson 12 for today. I am upset because I see a meaningless world. So, whatever upset that has been created is because of this meaningless world that was initially created by the meaningless thoughts. So, everything is interrelated, you see, right? So, that's why it's important to not give it thought, to not give it meaning, so that it will not create this upset and disturb your peace. So the importance of this idea lies in the fact that it contains a correction for a major perceptual distortion. And this distortion stems from the meaningless thoughts that are of the ego. So you think that what upsets you is a frightening world or a sad world or even a violent world or an insane world. All these attributes are given it by you. The world is meaningless in itself. And these exercises are done with eyes open. Look around you, this time quite slowly, and try to pace yourself so that the slow shifting of your glance from one thing to another involves a fairly constant time interval. And do not allow the time of the shift to become markedly longer or shorter, but try instead to keep a measured, even tempo throughout. What you see does not matter. You teach yourself this as you give whatever your glance rest on equal attention and equal time. This is a beginning step in learning to give them all equal value. And as you look about you, say to yourself, I think I see a fearful world, a dangerous world, a hostile world, a sad world, a wicked world, a crazy world. And these are all definitely created by fears, created by the ego, right? Because the world doesn't have to be that way. But if you're living in fear, you will see the world this way and then act accordingly, right? And this can go on so on, using whatever descriptive terms happen to occur to you. If terms which seem positive rather than negative occur to you, include them. For example, you might think of a good world or a satisfying world, and if such terms occur to you, use them along with the rest. And you may not yet understand why these nice adjectives belong in these exercises, but remember that a good world implies a bad one, and a satisfying world implies an unsatisfying one. All terms which cross your mind are suitable subjects for today's exercises, and their seeming quality does not matter. So be sure that you do not alter the time intervals between applying today's idea to what you think is pleasant and what you think is unpleasant. For the purposes of these exercises, there is no difference between them. At the end of the practice period, add, "But I am upset because I see a meaningless world." So a powerful affirmation, right, for your day whenever these thoughts come up. What is meaningless is neither good nor bad. So why then should a meaningless world upset you? And if you could accept the world as meaningless and let the truth be written upon it for you, it would make you indescribably happy. But because it is meaningless, you are impelled to write upon it what you would have it be. And it is this that you see in it. It is this that is meaningless in truth, right? There is no truth in these thoughts. And we live in truth, right? That is something, as a light being, we always hold on to, is living in truth. And none of these meaningless thoughts are of truth. So beneath your words is written the Word of God. And I'm actually going to underline that because that is powerful. Beneath your words is written the Word of God. That is truth, right? That is the truth with the capital T. The truth upsets you now, but when your words have been erased, you will see His with the capital H. That is the ultimate purpose of these exercises. That is the purpose of A Course in Miracles, is to get us to become one with the truth of God. And that's just powerful just in and of itself, right? That's the miracle. 3 or 4 times a day are enough for practicing this idea. Not should the practice periods exceed a minute, and you may find even this too long. Terminate the exercises whenever you experience a sense of strain. Alright, my soul family, so let's continue with 2 more lessons for today. We've come really far in just these first 2 episodes, so I am just very proud. Okay, so lesson 13. A meaningless world engenders fear. So why are we discussing this, right? These meaningless thoughts that create a meaningless world is because this meaningless world creates fear. And living in fear is not a way to live, right? So that is the purpose of this. Today's idea is really just another form of the preceding one, except that it is more specific as to the emotion aroused. Actually, a meaningless world is impossible. Nothing without meaning exists, right? At the end of the day, everything has some kind of meaning, at least the meaning that we've given it, right? So it doesn't mean that that is the only meaning. That's why we're saying that it really is meaningless, because it is subjective to the kind of meaning. Everybody can have a different meaning to that same chair, to that same book, right? To that same experience even, or place. However, it does not follow that you will not think that you perceive something has no meaning. On the contrary, you will be particularly likely to think that you do perceive it. So recognition of meaninglessness arouses intense anxiety in all the separated ones. It represents a situation in which God and the ego challenge each other as to whose meaning is to be written in the empty space which meaninglessness provides. That is a powerful explanation. It's really a war and a battle between God and the ego, right? So the ego rushes in frantically to establish its own ideas there, right? It will never miss a beat. And it's fearful that the void may otherwise be used to demonstrate its own reality, that God will show the true way. And on this alone, it is correct. So it is essential, therefore, that you learn to recognize the meaninglessness and accept it without fear. If you are fearful, it is certain that you will endow the world with attributes which it does not possess and crowd it with images that do not exist. To the ego, illusions are safety devices, as they must also be to you who equate yourself with the ego. So the exercises for today, which should be done about 3 or 4 times for no more than a minute or so at each time, are to be practiced in a somewhat different way from the preceding ones. With eyes closed, repeat today's idea to yourself, and then open your eyes and look about you slowly, saying, I am looking at a meaningless world. Repeat this statement to yourself as you look about, and then close your eyes and conclude with, a meaningless world engenders fear because I think I am in competition with God. Now that speaks a lot, right? That's basically acknowledging that it's our ego fighting against God. So you may find it difficult to avoid resistance in one form or another to this concluding statement. Whatever form such resistance may take, remind yourself that you are really afraid of such a thought because of the vengeance of the enemy. And what is this enemy? It's just anything that is against God, right? You are not expected to believe the statement at this point and will probably try to dismiss it as preposterous. Note carefully, however, any signs of overt or covert fear for which it may arouse. This is our first attempt at stating an explicit cause and effect relationship of a kind which you are very inexperienced in recognizing. So do not dwell on the concluding statement and try not even to think of it except during the exercise periods. That will suffice at present. And last but certainly not least for today, lesson 14. God did not create a meaningless world. So this meaningless world that is engendering fear is not created by God. It's not of God. So why fall victim to these meaningless thoughts, which will lead you to this meaningless world that is not of God? Because we're trying to be on God's land here, right? So the idea for today is, of course, the reason why a meaningless world is impossible. What God did not create does not exist, right? So it is an illusion. So anything that is not of God is actually literally an illusion. It's not real. You think it's real because that's the ego making you believe it's real and fighting so that you may have no peace, basically. And if you fall for it, then you're giving into illusions, which you remove that veil and you find out that it's just not true. So everything that does not exist exists as He created it. So everything that does exist exists as He created it, right? That's the only thing that is real. The world you see has nothing to do with reality. It is of your own making and it does not exist. So the exercises for today are to be practiced with eyes closed throughout. The mind searching period should be short, a minute at most. Do not have more than 3 practice periods with today's idea unless you find them comfortable. And if you do, it will be because you really understand what they are for. So the idea for today is another step in learning to let go of the thoughts which you have written on the world and see the Word of God in their place. The early steps in this exchange, which can truly be called salvation, can be quite difficult and even quite painful. Some of them will lead you directly into fear because, again, that's the resistance of the ego. And you will not be left there. You will go far beyond it. Our direction is towards perfect safety and perfect peace, right? That's the direction that we want to go towards, and that's by following God. And that's what's called salvation. That is the salvation that God is offering us and what He does talk about in the first teachings here. So you definitely want to get access to the full teachings at my School of Light to learn more about God's plan for salvation, the illusions of fear, the illusions of the ego. There's so much that we went into that you will just really understand this even deeper. Okay, so with eyes closed, think of all the horrors in the world that cross your mind. And name each one as it occurs to you, if you have the courage, right? And then deny its reality. You could just deny them as they come up and just see that it's not real. It's your ego trying to create fear, but it's not real. It's not of God. So God did not create it, and so it is not real. Say, for example, God did not create that war, and so it is not real. God did not create that airplane crash, and so it is not real. God did not create that disaster or whatever, and so it is not real. You can specify and fill in the blank. Suitable subjects for the application of today's idea also include anything that you are afraid might happen to you or to anyone about whom you are concerned. In each case, name this disaster quite specifically. Do not use general terms. For example, do not say, God did not create illness, but God did not create cancer or heart attacks or whatever may arouse fear in you. Be very specific and then take away its meaning. Take away its acknowledgement that it is real. And then that's how we just let them go. This is your personal repertory of horrors of which you are looking. These things are part of the world that you see. These things happen in the world, right? That's reality. but it doesn't mean that it is of God, and so it doesn't mean that it should be real. And I know that that sounds weird, right? But it is almost like the creation of that is not of God, and it's not what He intended for it to be real, right? So, and if that's something that you're fearful of, which you can manifest through your own thoughts, it's not real, and then you acknowledge that, and it will not be something that is real in your life, because you're acknowledging it as just a thought. Because a lot of people are afraid of things, right? Because of what's happened in the world, which were not of God in the first place. And so there's a lot of people that hold on to those thoughts, those traumas, those horrors, and then that's basically what they magnetize, and that's something that we need to let go of, because you want to create your own personal salvation. These things are part of the world that you see. Some of them are shared illusions, which collectively people can create as well. And others are part of your personal hell, right? Maybe something that you personally attracted in your life. It does not matter though. What God did not create can only be in your own mind apart from His. Therefore, it has no meaning. In recognition of this fact, conclude the practice periods by repeating today's idea. God did not create a meaningless world. So God did not intend for the world to be used in that way. God intended for all of us to live in the Garden of Eden, in paradise, right? That was His intention. But because there is evil in the world, there's dark, and there's temptations, and it can be swayed, then those are not of God. And those realities that people create for themselves is not of God. So the idea for today can of course be applied to anything that disturbs you during the day, aside from the practice periods. So be very specific in applying it and say, God did not create a meaningless world. He did not specify the situation which is disturbing you, and so it is not real. And I think this is a beautiful way of ending today's class. I had so much fun going over these. I know that they're somewhat intense, but it actually creates an a relief sense, because it really gets us out of that fear, creates a sense of comfort, it brings peace back into our aura and our life and our hearts, and it reminds us that miracles are all around, and it begins with having the faith, standing in our higher self's truth, and standing one with God. So I'm wishing you all a blessed night. Have a beautiful one, and I will see you for the next episode. Namaste.